John 4:47. Hic cum audisset quia Iesus adveniret a Judaea in Galileam, abiit ad eum, et rogabat eum, ut descenderet et sanaret filium eius, incipiebat enim mori. This man, when he had heard that Jesus was arriving from Judea into Galilee, went off to him and was asking him to come down and heal his son, for he, that is the son, was on the point of dying. Quite a number of interesting features in this verse as we continue with this fresh story that we've been walking through, where Jesus is back in the region of Galilee and he's at Capernaum and he's meeting there with a regulus, as this person was called in the last verse, a local official or magistrate, something like that. That, by the way, is who's being referred to by hic, this person. That is the regulus of the last verse. This person, the regulus, the magistrate, and again, this next bit is going to give us kind of the background here to how this encounter comes about. When, here's cum circumstantial again, so we're going to look for the subjunctive, and we find it in these two verbs. Again, this whole thing is going to be subordinate to a main clause. Here, the verbs of the main clause are these, and we'll see how the sentence develops as we go. When he had heard, that is previous to the action of abiit, when he had heard earlier that, again, here we would have probably an accusative infinitive construction if this were classical Latin, but because we're in late antiquity, we're going to use quia, that. When he had heard that Jesus was coming or arriving at around the same time as he had heard. Okay, so remember, here we have the imperfect subjunctive in the sequence of tenses. It only has relative chronological meaning, and it means time at about the same time as the verb in the clause on which it is dependent. So there's a whole sequence, a whole train of relative temporal relationships here. Again, this might make your head hurt, like traveling through different time zones across the face of the earth sometimes makes my head hurt. But again, try and take it step by step. So when this person had heard that, so he had heard this earlier, that Jesus was coming, was arriving from Judea into Galilee. Now, we talked about the region of Galilee enough already. What did he do? Here's our main clause. From ab eo, he went off or went out to him, that is to Jesus, and was asking him. We've got to note the imperfect here. Bat is that characteristic ending for the first and second conjugations in the imperfect tense that lets us know what's going on. He was asking him or pleading with him, rogabat eum. Now, we talked about verbs of asking before, I think, and what you need to know is that verbs of asking, they can just take a direct object in the accusative when we're talking about a thing. So he asked for, in English we would say, a sword or a jug of water. Whatever object one requests in Latin with a verb like rogo, rogare can simply go in the accusative. You don't need to use a preposition as we do in English when we say ask for something. You can just say he asked this item. We can also use the accusative to indicate the person who is asked for a thing. And in fact, we can do both at the same time, and verbs of asking or inquiring in Latin very often take two accusatives, an accusative of the person asked, an accusative of the thing that is being asked for. Here, though, only one of those things is happening. We do get an accusative for the person who's being asked. Something is being asked of this person. Again, that's Jesus here. But instead of an accusative noun indicating the thing asked, we get a whole clause. Now, this is what is called an object clause, or sometimes a substantive clause. Different grammars refer to them different ways. But the point, the idea is, this whole clause functions in place of the noun we would otherwise expect, explaining what is asked for. What did he ask for? He asked not for a thing from Jesus, but he asked for this action from Jesus. And when we want to express something like that in Latin, we can use ut plus subjunctive. And here we get two nice imperfect subjunctives, third person singulars in both cases. So he asked him, here's how we translate it into English. He asked him to come down and to heal his son. Now, we have to note, this is a little bit confusing perhaps, but eius refers back to our regulus, okay, the person making the request. Doesn't refer to Jesus or to some other person. Why didn't the translator use suum? Because that might make it appear in context as though the regulus was asking Jesus to heal his own son, that is, Jesus' own son. And throughout the history of Latin prose, there are lots of instances of kind of some confusion and inconsistent practice in terms of when do we use the genitive singular of the third person pronoun and when do we use this possessive adjective in different levels of subordinate clauses, so as not to avoid confusing our readers about who belongs to whom or to what. Don't worry too much about it. Just try and interpret from the context, as I know you already did, and you won't be led astray. So the Regulus was asking Jesus to come down and to heal his son. Why come down, by the way? Well, one thing you'll notice in the biblical narratives consistently is that the geography of the Holy Land is reflected very vividly in the language used by the evangelists. And I mean, you see this in the Old Testament authors as well. One goes up to Jerusalem from just about any other place because Jerusalem is at an elevated point. It's surrounded by mountains. It is built on Mount Zion itself, of course. And especially from Galilee, which is very low-lying, you've got to go up to get to Judea generally and Jerusalem specifically. But remember, Jesus is coming into Galilee from Judea, so he's still got to descend. He's still got to go down into the kind of depressed basin that is around the Sea of Galilee, and one part of it in particular around Capernaum, where his son is located, and he's got to heal him. That's what the Regulus is pleading with him to do. Sano, sanare, source of many English words like sanitary, etc. I'm sure you can think of others. Now, finally, this last little bit is also worth talking about. Incipiebat enim mori. We can take this almost as a separate sentence, or we can put a semicolon here to divide these up. This strikes me as sort of an awkward and almost a little bit unintentionally amusing way of expressing this in Latin. I'm sure it didn't seem so to people in late antiquity. That's probably just my ignorance showing through. But in any case, it's not a common idiom in Latin so far as I know. Literally, it means he was beginning. Again, here, kind of the imperfect for a sense of vividness. He was beginning to die. Mori, perhaps you remember, is passive infinitive because morior is a deponent verb, to die. You can think of the phrase memento mori, remember that you will die. Remember that all things will die. In any case, he was beginning to die. This is attempting to render the Greek for he was about to die. And actually, our 16th century humanist friend Erasmus suggested some alternatives here because he also seems to have found this a little bit awkward. He says, our author might just as well have said erat enim moriturus, using the future participle, he was about to die. Or, Erasmus says, he might even have said, more idiomatically, tendebat ad mortem. He was drawing near to death, literally. Those are both very fine ways to say it in Latin. No doubt everybody understood what incipiebat and mori meant, even if it was a little bit unidiomatic by classical standards.